The crash and the cry the wind was quiet on planet Virel today. Gray rocks stretched across the land like broken bones in the distance. Orange dust rose with every small breeze. Jake Monroe, a lone human explorer, walked across the rocky path, scanning the land with his visor. He was here to collect mineral samples and study signs of past alien life. Just another day on a quiet, empty world, but that silence didn't last. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed across the valley. The sky lit up with a flash of fire, followed by thick black smoke. Jake looked up and saw a small spacecraft hurtling through the sky. Trailing sparks, it was spinning, crashing, losing control. Then the ground shook, and a wave of dust rolled toward him like a storm. The ship had gone down not far from his base, maybe just over the next hill without thinking. Jake grabbed his med pack and ran. His boots kicked up red dirt as he rushed through the dry landscape. As he climbed the hill, he could already see the broken parts of the ship scattered across the ground. Metal bent like paper, flames crackling from the sides. No movement, no noise. Just the sound of the wind and fire. Jake approached carefully. He didn't know what kind of ship this was. It wasn't human, that was for sure. Maybe alien pirates. Maybe smugglers. Maybe scientists. He had no idea. But something made him keep walking closer. Then he heard it. A small cry, soft and scared, like a whimper. Almost like a baby's sob. Jake froze. He listened again, and the sound came clearer. It was coming from inside the wreck. He pushed aside a piece of burning metal. Then another, behind a cracked wall, half covered in debris. He found a small escape pod. The door had popped open. And inside was a tiny creature it looked up at him with wide, glowing green eyes. Its skin was smooth and purple, with tiny arms and legs. It had small horns, curled back like waves, and its face was wet with tears. Jake stared in shock. It was a child, an alien child, no bigger than a 6-year-old human kid. The child made a sound soft, broken, and full of fear. Then it said one word, slowly, like it had just learned it. Papa. Jake blinked, not sure he'd heard it right. Wait, what? He said out loud. The child reached out and held his gloved hand, gripping it tightly. Papa, it said again. This time with more strength, more trust. Jake's heart dropped. He looked at the crash site again, then back at the child. He quickly checked the ship's logs on a blinking screen nearby. Only 3 life forms had been on board, 2 adults and 1 juvenile. The adults hadn't survived. The child was now the only one left. Jake stood still for a long moment. This wasn't part of the mission. He wasn't trained for this. But the child's small fingers wrapped around his hand again, refusing to let go. As the sun set over the alien horizon, Jake made a choice. He lifted the child gently into his arms. The alien's head rested on his shoulder. Still whispering that one word, Papa, back at his camp, Jake cleaned the alien's wounds and gave it water. The child watched him with big eyes, silent but curious. It tried to copy his movements, tried to sit like him, eat like him. Jake found himself talking to it, even though it barely understood. Something about those eyes made him feel responsible. That night, as the stars lit up the sky, the child lay beside Jake near the fire. It pointed to the sky and made little sounds. Jake didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. The child had lost its home, its family, and now, somehow, it believed Jake was its father. He didn't correct it, not yet, maybe not ever. In the soft dirt near the campfire, the alien drew something with its finger. Jake leaned over to look. It was a drawing of 3 figures, one small, one tall, and one with no face. The child circled the tall figure and smiled, pointing at Jake, then circled the small figure, pointing at itself, then tapped the blank one and looked sad. Jake felt a chill in his chest. there was more to this than just a crash. Much more. He looked around at the dark horizon. Something about this planet suddenly felt not so empty anymore, and he knew this was just the beginning. The wind was colder that night. Jake sat by the campfire, staring into the dancing flames. Beside him, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, was the alien child. Its small eyes blinked, slowly, trying to stay awake. Every now and then, it would glance at Jake, like checking to see if he was still there. Jake wasn't sure what he felt. He had come to this planet for peace and quiet. For a long time, he had wanted to be alone, far from the noise of Earth. But now, he wasn't alone anymore. Now there was this small creature next to him, scared, silent, and completely dependent on him. The child hadn't said Papa again, not since the fire had been built and the stars had come out. But Jake could still feel the weight of that word. It echoed in his mind like a whisper he couldn't forget. He looked at the child. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The alien tilted its head. Confused, Jake tried again, pointing to himself. "Jake," he said. "My name is Jake." Then he pointed to the child. "You." The child stared, then tapped its chest. It made a small sound, 3 syllables, soft and musical. It sounded like Solon. Jake repeated it slowly, and the child nodded, smiling for the first time. Solon. So now the child had a name. It made things feel more real, more human, even if nothing about this was human at all. As the night grew darker, Jake started scanning the crash debris using his portable tablet. He needed answers. What species was Solon, and why had the ship crashed? Most of the data was damaged, but one thing was clear. The ship hadn't crashed by accident. Something had hit it. A weapon signature was burned into the hull. Clean, sharp, and deliberate. Jake frowned. That meant someone, or something, had wanted this ship to go down. Behind him, Solon shivered. Jake turned back and tucked the blanket tighter around him. "You're safe here," he whispered, though he wasn't sure it was true. Solon pointed up at the stars. He made a little sound, a kind of hum. Then he touched Jake's arm gently and closed his eyes. Suddenly, Jake saw something not with his eyes, but in his mind, a flash of memory, like a dream. Solon's parents, holding him, smiling. Then fear running, alarms, explosions. Jake gasped and pulled back, his heart racing. "What? Dot?" he whispered. Solon opened his eyes and looked tired. Jake didn't know what had just happened, but one thing was clear. This child was not ordinary. He had some kind of ability, something powerful and probably dangerous. Jake looked at the stars again, uneasy. If others knew about this child, they would come looking. And not to help, he had to protect Solon, not just because of the strange connection, but because it was the right thing to do. He couldn't walk away, not anymore. Later that night, Jake lay under the stars with Solon sleeping beside him. He watched the child breathe slowly, peacefully, for the first time in years. Jake felt something warm in his chest. He hadn't felt that since Earth, since before the accident, since his own daughter. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the cold planet didn't feel so empty. But peace didn't last long. In the early hours before dawn, Jake woke suddenly. There was a sound, quiet, distant, but not natural. A faint electronic beep, like a signal. He got up quickly and scanned the area. Nothing on the horizon. But the signal kept repeating, like a heartbeat. He followed the sound to the edge of the crash site. There, hidden beneath a broken seat, was a small round device, blinking red. Jake picked it up carefully, eyes narrowing. It was a tracker. Someone had planted it on the ship on Solon. He ran back to the camp, heart pounding. Solon was awake now, sitting up with wide eyes, sensing something was wrong. Jake knelt beside him and showed the tracker. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Solon looked at it, then looked away, ashamed. Jake understood. Solon had known, but he was afraid to say. Jake sighed and crushed the device under a rock. "We'll move camp in the morning," he said, mostly to himself. "It's not safe here anymore." Solon reached out again. Small fingers gripping Jake's hand. Jake didn't pull away this time. In fact, he held on tighter. Something had changed. This wasn't just about survival now. This was about family even. If they didn't share the same blood. As the first light of dawn touched the hills, Jake whispered something he hadn't said in years. "Don't worry, kid," he said softly. "I've got you now." And far above them, something moved silently in orbit, watching, waiting. The morning air was still, but Jake's mind was not. He packed quickly, his hands moving with quiet urgency. Solon watched him silently, sitting cross-legged beside the warm ashes of the fire. The tracker was gone, crushed and buried, but the danger was not. Jake could feel it, like electricity in the air. They were not alone on this planet anymore. They left the old camp behind and moved toward the forest. It wasn't thick, just a sparse group of tall, twisted trees with purple leaves and bark like stone. The ground here was softer, the light dimmer. Solon held Jake's hand, his small fingers gripping tightly. It was quiet, too quiet, not even birds or bugs. No sound except their footsteps and the occasional crack of a twig. Jake didn't like it. His instincts told him something was watching. They found a small cave, nestled under a hill of black rock. It wasn't much, but it would hide them for now. Jake laid down some gear, set up the heat lamp, and placed a motion sensor outside the entrance. Then he finally sat down, rubbing his tired eyes. Solon came over and gently touched Jake's face. Jake smiled faintly. "I'm okay, buddy," he whispered. Solon tilted his head, sensing the worry anyway as night came. Jake checked the scanner again. No movement, no signals, but the unease hadn't gone. That's when he noticed it. A small symbol carved into the cave wall. Deep and old. It wasn't human and it wasn't from Solon's crashed ship either. It was a spiral, marked with 3 slashes across it. Jake traced it with his fingers. Frowning, Solon came closer, eyes fixed on the symbol. His body tensed. He stepped back, fear spreading across his face. Jake turned to him. "You've seen this before," he said slowly. Solon nodded, his voice a whisper. "Bad." Jake's stomach dropped. Whoever had made this mark, they were not friends. That night, Jake didn't sleep. He sat near the entrance, blaster rifle in hand, eyes scanning the forest. The stars above twinkled quietly, pretending the world was peaceful. But Jake knew better. Just past midnight, the motion sensor beeped once, then went silent. Jake stood up, weapon ready, heart racing. He turned off the lamp and crouched low, staring out at the dark trees. Nothing moved. Then he saw it, a shape, tall and slim, just beyond the tree line. Not a beast, not human. It had long arms and glowing blue eyes. It wasn't looking at Jake. It was looking at the cave. Jake's finger hovered near the trigger, but he didn't shoot. The figure didn't move. Then, after what felt like forever, it vanished, like smoke in the wind. Jake rushed back inside. Solon was awake, staring at him with wide eyes. Jake knelt beside him. "It's okay," he said, even though he wasn't sure. "We're moving again tomorrow, before dawn." They climbed through the forest toward higher ground. Jake wanted a view. He needed to see what they were walking into. From the top of the ridge, he spotted it, far on the horizon. Something shimmered like a ship, but not crashed, landed. He zoomed in with his scope. Sleek, dark, and unfamiliar. Whoever they were, they had come here recently. They weren't hiding. Jake lowered the scope and sighed. He had 2 choices now: run forever or learn what he was dealing with. He looked at Solon. The child was watching a small flower blooming near the edge of the ridge, innocent, curious, untouched by the fear. Crawling through Jake's chest, Jake made his choice. "We go closer," he said. Just enough to see who they are. As they moved, Solon stopped suddenly. He bent down and touched the ground. Jake turned around. "What is it?" Solon's hand glowed faintly as he touched the soil. A ripple of light spread out across the earth, like energy searching for something. Then the image appeared holographic and shaky. Two creatures, armored, holding weapons, scanning the forest. They had found the old camp. Solon fell backward. Dizzy, Jake caught him quickly. "You did that?" he asked, shocked. Solon nodded weakly. Jake looked out toward the distant ship. This was bigger than he thought. Solon wasn't just an orphaned alien. He was something more, something wanted. And now Jake was part of it. They kept moving until they found a small cliff overlooking the enemy ship. From there, they could see the figure stall. Armored helmets hiding their faces. They were setting up equipment, scanning the area. Speaking in a strange, clicking language, they didn't look friendly. Jake knew the truth now. This wasn't just a rescue mission. These weren't people looking for survivors. They were hunters. He stepped back and looked at Solon. "I don't know who you are," Jake said softly. "But I'm not letting them take you." Solon reached out again, his small hand touching Jake's chest. He closed his eyes, and Jake felt it again, that warmth, that bond, stronger now, deeper. They weren't just two lost souls on a broken planet anymore. They were something more. A team, a family. And the hunters had no idea what was coming. The sky turned gray as clouds rolled over the hills. Jake knew what that meant: cover, but also danger. He knelt behind a ridge, watching the alien hunters below. There were 4 of them now, maybe more, hiding nearby. Their armor was dark and curved like bone. Their weapons long and sharp. They moved with precision, scanning the land, looking for signs. Jake held his breath as one of them pulled out a device, a tracker. The same type he had crushed 2 nights ago. They had backups. They were professionals. Solon crouched beside him, small and quiet. He didn't speak, but his eyes were full of fear. Jake placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered. But it wasn't. The hunters were getting closer. Too close. Jake looked at the sky again. The clouds thickened, and wind began to howl through the trees. They had to move. Now he led Solon down the backside of the ridge. Every step was careful. Every leaf avoided. But the hunters were fast, and they were tracking with tech Jake couldn't match. By midday, the chase had begun. It started with a sharp sound in the air: click. Click, click. Jake turned and saw a small drone, floating like a bug. Scanning the area, he aimed and fired, the shot blasting it into sparks. But it was too late. The signal had been sent. The hunters knew where they were. "Run," Jake said, grabbing Solon's hand. They sprinted through the trees, jumping over roots, ducking under branches. The wind screamed around them as lightning cracked the sky behind. Then came the sound of machines, fast, smooth, deadly. The hunters weren't walking anymore. They were flying. Jake pulled out a small explosive from his pack. He threw it behind him and shouted, "Cover your ears." It exploded with a flash of light and sound, shaking the trees. For a moment, there was silence. Then a shouted, deep, alien roar of anger. They were still coming. Jake's legs burned as they climbed a steep hill. At the top, he saw an old ruin made of stone and crystal, half buried in vines. He didn't know what it was. He just knew it might be shelter. They rushed inside. The ruin was quiet, full of strange glowing symbols on the walls. Solon looked around and whispered, "Old home?" Jake stared at him. "You've been here before?" Solon nodded slowly, his voice small, before crash. Suddenly, the floor lit up beneath Solin's feet. A soft blue circle glowed where he stood. Symbols began to pulse on the walls. Then a hidden door slid open with a low hum. Inside was a chamber, circular, clean, untouched by time. Jake led Solin inside. The door closed behind them, sealing with a hiss. Silence. It was safe. For now, Jake leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Solin sat down on the floor. Looking exhausted, Jake slid down beside him, heart still racing. "That was close," he muttered. Solin looked up and pointed at a large crystal in the center of the room. It was glowing faintly. He walked over to it and placed his hand on the surface. The crystal pulsed, then projected a soft light in the air. Images appeared: his planet, his people, then a ship fleeing from war, then darkness, then Jake. Jake's breath caught. "What is this?" he asked. Solin turned and looked at him, eyes full of something heavy: trust, sadness, memory. "Chosen," Solin whispered. Jake frowned. "What do you mean, chosen?" Solin touched his own chest, then pointed to Jake. "You protect," he said. "Father, not by blood, but by heart." Jake's eyes stung for a moment. He didn't speak. There were no words big enough for that. But the moment was cut short. A loud bang echoed through the ruined walls. The hunters had arrived. Jake jumped to his feet, pulled Solin close. The door began to shake from outside blasts. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll break through." Solin looked at the crystal again. He placed both hands on it, eyes shut tight. The room began to shake, but this time it wasn't the hunters, it was Solin. Energy burst from the crystal in a ring of light. It spread through the ruin, down into the earth. The hunters outside stopped firing, confused. Then the forest itself responded. Trees grew thorns, roots shifted, stones rose to block paths. It was like the planet was listening to Solin, protecting him. Jake stared in disbelief. "What are you?" he whispered. Solin opened his eyes, glowing faintly. His voice was calm. "Last of Starborn." The door burst open, but the hunters stepped into chaos. The ruins' defense had been awakened. Traps, vines, energy walls. They couldn't reach Jake and Solin. Jake grabbed his pack and held Solin's hand again. "We run while we can," he said. Solin nodded. They slipped through a tunnel at the back of the chamber, one step deeper into the unknown, one step closer to the truth, and far above, in orbit, a second ship blinked into existence, watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to descend. The chase wasn't over. It had only just begun. The tunnel was old, but alive. Glowing vines lit the path as Jake and Solin moved deeper underground. Every step echoed softly, swallowed by silence behind them. The sounds of battle faded. The ruin had protected them for now. Jake's mind was racing. What had he just seen? Solin had awakened something, not just inside the ruin, but inside the planet itself. The child's touch had made the forest move, the stone obey. Jake looked down at Solin, who walked calmly beside him. He wasn't tired, not afraid. He looked like he knew this place. At the end of the tunnel, the space opened wide. A massive underground chamber appeared before them. In the center stood a tall crystal pillar, surrounded by strange carvings and silent statues. Jake stepped forward slowly. The air was thick here, filled with energy he didn't understand. Solin walked ahead, his small feet barely making a sound. He placed both hands on the pillar, and it responded with light. The room came alive. Floating symbols filled the images, memories, voices from the past. Jake watched as scenes unfolded. Around him, a planet bathed in starlight. A people tall, gentle, glowing from within. They lived in harmony with nature, their cities floating in the sky. Then, war. Ships darkened the skies. Fire rained from orbit. The peaceful race was hunted. Destroyed, scattered, only a few survived. One ship, carrying a child, the last of his kind. Solon Jake's chest tightened. He wasn't just protecting a lost alien anymore. He was guarding the last spark of an entire civilization. The projection changed again. Now Jake saw a prophecy, written in ancient light. A starborn child would survive the fall, but he would need a protector. Someone from another world, a heart brave enough to raise what the stars left behind. Jake stepped back, stunned, his voice cracked. Me. Solon turned to him and nodded. He pointed at Jake's chest and said, "Chosen?" Jake didn't know what to say. He had never believed in destiny, never believed in anything bigger than himself, but now, this child had trusted him, and the stars had spoken. A loud crack echoed above them, dust fell from the ceiling, and light from the surface peeked through broken stone. The hunters were digging, finding their way in. Jake looked around and spotted a second tunnel, hidden behind a collapsed wall. He cleared the path and motioned to Solon. "We're not done yet," he said. "Come on." They moved through the narrow path, deeper into the unknown, but something had changed. Jake no longer felt like he was running away. Now he was moving toward something after a long walk. The tunnel opened into a strange garden. Underground light bloomed across crystals and alien trees. Flowers opened as Solon walked past them, their petals glowing softly. Jake sat down for a moment, resting against a smooth stone. Solon knelt beside a pool of clear water and stared into it silently. Jake watched him. "You knew who you were this whole time, didn't you?" he asked. Solon didn't answer, but after a moment, he nodded. Jake leaned back and looked at the glowing ceiling. "I was just a broken man hiding on a dead planet," he said. You brought it back to life." Solon turned, his face soft. "You fix too," he whispered. Jake looked at him, confused. "Fix?" Solon placed a hand on Jake's chest. "Heart," he said. "You fix?" Jake didn't speak. His eyes were damp now, but he didn't wipe them, for the first time in years. He didn't feel hollow inside, but peace was not free. A deep rumble shook the garden. The hunters were close again. They would not stop, not until Solon was taken or dead. Jake stood up and helped Solon to his feet. "We keep moving," he said, "but next time we fight back." As they walked toward another exit, Solon paused at a tree covered in glowing leaves. He touched its trunk, and it shimmered. From the bark, a small object slid out, a stone pendant with swirling light. Inside, Solon gave it to Jake. Jake took it carefully. "What is it?" Solon smiled softly. "Key," he said. Jake nodded, not fully understanding, but knowing it mattered. As they stepped into the next corridor, Solon's voice echoed behind them. "My people." "Not gone," he said. Jake turned to look at him. "Sleeping," Solon said, waiting. Then the light from his pendant touched the wall and the carvings began to move. They formed the shape of many figures, trapped in crystal. Alive but frozen in time. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Stasis," he whispered. Solon nodded. "Wake." Someday, Jake gripped the pendant tightly. Now he understood. Solon wasn't just the last of his kind. He was the bridge to bring them back, and Jake, the outsider, the loner, the broken man. He was no longer just a protector. He was the first member of a new future. Asterisk, the sky above the canyon was burning red. The clouds were thick and heavy, glowing. With the light of a coming storm, Jake stood at the edge of a rocky slope. Watching the enemy ship rise above the trees, they had found them again. This time, there was no running left. Behind him, Solon stood still, holding the glowing pendant in his hand. He looked smaller than ever, but something in his eyes had changed. He wasn't afraid anymore. Jake crouched beside him. "You know what's coming, don't you?" he asked. Solon nodded, then looked at Jake with quiet strength. "You go," Solon said softly. "I stay." Jake blinked. "No," he said firmly. "We stay together." Solon shook his head. "They want me, not you." Jake stood, jaw tight. Heart heavy. "I'm not leaving you," he said. "I don't care what they want." The first blast came from the sky, a warning shot. The ground shook as smoke filled the air. Trees snapped like matchsticks. The hunters had arrived. Jake grabbed Solon's hand and led him through the rocky paths toward a narrow valley. He had set traps there earlier, small explosives and motion-triggered bursts. Not enough to win, but enough to slow them down. The wind screamed through the rocks above them. Shapes moved like shadows, hunters with wings, gliding silently. Jake could hear them speaking in that sharp, clicking language. He stopped behind a boulder and looked at Solon. "You still have power from that crystal." Solon nodded, unsure. Jake placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you've got left. You hold it, okay?" Solon didn't speak, but his fingers tightened around the pendant. The first hunter dropped down near the entrance of the valley. Jake raised his blaster and fired. The shot hit armor, but the creature didn't fall. It turned and roared, calling. The others, Jake grabbed Solon and ran deeper into the narrow path. As they ran, traps exploded behind them, smoke, fire, rock. One of the hunters was thrown against the cliff wall, broken and still. But more came, too many. Jake ducked behind a broken ledge and turned to Solon. "This might be it," he said. With a breathless laugh, "Not how I planned to go out." Solon looked up, his eyes glowing softly in the shadow. "I protect too," he said. Jake stared at him. "What?" Solon stepped out from the cover, raised his small hands. The pendant in his grip blazed with light. Energy pulsed around him, shaking the rocks, bending the air. The hunters paused. Then, in one great burst, Solon sent a wave of force outward. A dome of pure light knocked the hunters back like leaves in a storm. Jake watched in awe, but then he saw Solon collapse to one knee. The light flickering. "Solon!" He shouted, rushing to his side. The child was breathing, but weak. His power had limits. He had given too much, too fast. Jake pulled him into his arms. The hunters were regrouping. He could hear them climbing again, faster now. He looked around, eyes desperate. Then he saw an old fuel cell from a crashed probe. Hidden under the rubble, it could blow the whole ridge. Jake looked down at Solon. The child opened his eyes slowly. "You go," Solon whispered again. Jake shook his head. "No," he said, voice rough. "No more running." He placed Solon down gently and stood, blaster in one hand, detonator in the other. He turned to face the canyon. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a miner or an explorer. He was a father, not by blood, but by choice. And a father protects, always. The first hunter climbed the ridge, followed by another. Then more. Jake fired, yelling as loud as the wind. He fought with everything he had. He wasn't trying to win. He was buying time. Time for Solon to escape. Time for hope to survive. But just before he could trigger the explosion, a flash of light surrounded him. A shield, soft blue, glowing from the pendant. Solon was behind him, standing. Again, weak but awake. He had come back for him. "No." Solon said firmly. "We stay." Together, Jake's eyes filled with tears. He smiled, even as the storm above broke open. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the hunters paused, confused. Then, above them, a new ship descended, sleek, silver, quiet. It hovered above the canyon, casting a beam of light down on them. A voice echoed from the ship, smooth and clear. "Step away from the child." The hunters turned, unsure. Jake and Solon stood within the beam, wrapped in light. Then, with one final burst of power, the pendant shattered, sending a shockwave across the ridge. The hunters were thrown back, scattered, and Jake and Solon disappeared into the beam, lifted into the safety of the ship. As the valley below faded into smoke, Jake held Solon close. They had made it, not because of luck, but because of love. And in that moment, Jake knew he hadn't just become a protector. He had become a father, by choice, by heart. The stars outside the window moved slowly. Jake sat near the viewing panel, arms folded, eyes lost in the vast black ocean. The hum of the alien ship was soft beneath his boots, steady like a heartbeat, safe behind him. Solon slept quietly, wrapped in a warm blanket of woven light. He looked peaceful. His chest rose and fell in a calm rhythm, like he'd finally found rest after endless running. Jake smiled. They had made it out. Not without scars, not without loss, but alive, together. The crew of the rescue ship had not spoken much. They were not human, but they were not hunters. Either their ship was smooth and silver, full of soft light and silence. They worked like monks, calm and distant. But when they saw Solon, they bowed, not to Jake, but to the child. He was not just a survivor. He was a symbol, a seed of something ancient, something sacred. Jake didn't understand everything, but he understood one thing clearly: Solon mattered. To the stars, to the past, to the future. He got up and walked quietly through the corridor of the ship. Walls pulsed with soft light, responding to his steps. At the far end, a door opened, revealing a room full of stasis chambers. Inside them were beings frozen in time, some tall like Solon, others smaller, different but familiar in their peace. Jake stepped closer and read the symbols above each pod. Their names, their roles: guardians, healers, story keepers, Solon's people, not extinct, just waiting. He turned as a voice echoed behind him. You have brought him home. One of the crew stood there, taller than Jake, eyes like glowing water. Jake nodded slowly. I didn't plan any of this, he said. The alien tilted its head. No one plans to change the stars, it replied, but some do it anyway. Jake looked back at the stasis pods. What happens now? The alien stepped forward, looking into the chamber. Now, it said, the boy learns. He remembers. He leads. Jake felt a quiet ache in his chest. You're taking him? The alien turned to him. No, it said, he will go where he chooses, but he is not yours alone. Jake looked down, then smiled. I know that, he said. I was never his owner. I was just the one who stayed. The alien nodded. And that is why he calls you father. Later, in the quiet of their small room, Solon woke. He sat up slowly and looked around. Blinking in the soft light, Jake walked over and knelt beside him. Hey, you're safe, he said gently. Solon looked up at him and smiled. Skyship, he whispered. Jake nodded. They say you're special, Jake said with a grin. Solon tilted his head. Jake chuckled. I mean, I already knew that. There was silence for a moment. Then Solon asked, You go now? Jake froze. He hadn't thought about that yet. He had come to that planet to disappear, to escape. Now, he wasn't sure where he belonged. He looked into Solon's eyes. No, he said finally. I go where you go. Solon smiled and nodded together. Days passed on the ship. Solon began learning from the crew about the stars, his people. The old language, he soaked in knowledge like light. Curious and bright, and Jake watched, proud and quiet. He helped where he could, shared old Earth stories, taught Solon to laugh at bad jokes. Sometimes they sat near the viewing window and just watched the stars move. Jake didn't need anything more. One evening, Solon placed the broken pendant in Jake's hand. It no longer glowed, but Jake kept it anyway. Someday, Solon said softly, I fix. Jake looked at him. You already did. Far in the distance, their next destination shimmered. A planet with green lands and blue skies. A place where the stasis pods could be opened. A place to start again. Jake stood beside Solon as the ship approached orbit. He looked down at the world below, clean, untouched, new. This where we build something better? He asked. Solon nodded. Yes, home. Jake placed a hand on Solon's shoulder. He didn't have the right words, so he just said the one that mattered most. Son, and Solon said back. Father, not by blood, but by choice, as the ship began its descent. The stars above them faded slowly behind clouds, but Jake knew they would always be there, just like this moment. A story that began with a crash, and ended with a family.